I'm Antonis Koussis from the National Observatory of Athens. We're in Vienna in EGU's 2019 meeting, and I will have the pleasure to interview Demetris Koutsoyiannis in the framework of the History of Hydrology. So, before we start discussing Demetris' career, let us talk briefly about you as a person. And let's begin at the beginning. You were born, I will say that, 1955, in the village of Epirus. This is a region in northwestern Greece, a mountainous place, right?
Yeah.
With abundant water, which is important in hydrology. Now, the country was recovering from a bloody civil war that had ended just 6 years ago and was preceded by Greece's engagement in World War II on the side of the Allies, events that had left scars in Greek society. So, please, take it from there. Tell us about your family, life in the village, Mesunta, early school, whatever comes to your mind that you think is important about your childhood.
So thank you, Antonis. You already said several key words for me, which have a very severe meaning. And actually, in one sentence, you touched a lot of things that touch me. I'm a man from another epoch. I think you were born in Athens, right?
Right.
Yeah, and perhaps you cannot imagine the life in a village at that period, because it was kind of a different epoch. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have telephone, we didn't have even the radio. So it was an agrarian phase, and I lived there for 12 years. And I finished the elementary school there. As you said, there is plenty of water. It's the village is called Mesunta, and it's very close to Achelos. Achelos is the biggest river of Greece in terms of discharge. Yes, I don't think the civil war influenced me directly, because I didn't know about that. But eventually, also the political situation was kind of touching me indirectly, and through my life it was important as well. So the water. You see, in such a place without consumerism, of course, water was a toy for me. For instance, before I go to school, I knew experimentally, but then I realized scientifically also what is a hydraulic jump, because I was able to make a hydraulic jump. It was one of my favorite toys. Also, I was able to construct a siphon, both inverted siphon and the regular siphon, which goes like this. So I had a working experience with water, and it happened also that my father had a water mill, so I knew about hydropower, and I knew everything about the operation of the mill, and it was another toy for me as well. It was also a social game, because there were all the time people coming and leaving the mill. So that's about the first years. And then I had to go to school, of course. Well, just to imagine, there were about 100 kids in six different classes with one teacher. So we were all together in one classroom, and the teacher went from class to class, etc., and in around system, yeah, all throughout all the day. Yeah, well, I wouldn't say I loved school, but there was something that it was very touching for me and kind of signaling my life. When I was perhaps 9 years old, my mother had to leave to Athens, and my father accompanied her because she had to do an operation, and they left home for 2-3 months, and I stayed there with another member of the family. Actually, it was a kind of external member, but she was orphan and it was adopted in my family, so we were the two of us. This lady did not care about school, of course. She was kind of ecologist, like communicated with animals, with plants, etc. So I told her I'm not going to school, and she said, okay, fine, don't go to school. And then after 3-4 weeks, the teacher came in an afternoon to my house and says, you haven't come to school, so I wanted to see how you are doing, etc. And can I stay this night at your house? And I said, yes, of course you can stay. Well, the two of us. So she slept there, and in the morning she tells me, can you accompany me to school? So, can you imagine that the teacher did this? From that moment, I was every day going to school.
Well, a caring and talented teacher. That is really good to have.
One more thing from the school. The village was a very, very well organized community, sustainable, what we call today sustainable, because the state only provided the teacher and nothing else. So the community provided everything else. And when there was snow, for instance, the snow could reach 1 meter or more. The parents would wake up earlier and clean the monopath in order for their schools to go, for their children to go to school. And this was just from the parents, not from the state. And then each kid would carry one piece of wood every day. And the teacher would cut the wood and hit the classroom. So it was very collective work, and it went very much. Now I see that people demand all the time, but it's very simple if you can do collectively. Yeah.
Good. From that beginning, of course, making it, I should have said that, to becoming a professor at the National Technical University of Athens, that is quite a big jump. But
yeah, unbelievable. I cannot be.
To complete your elementary education, you had to move to Athens, or your family decided that you moved to Athens, which was certainly a big change from what you just described. Not only academically, but in daily life, everyday life. And not only that, but exactly during your high school time, Greece was under the dictatorship of the colonels, which was a very difficult time. So, how difficult was the adjustment to your new big city environment? How did you decide being there to do something with the rest of your education. We'll get to that. But let's start first.
This was one of the toughest periods of Greece, I guess, and through the years of the high school, 6 years, it was the dictatorship all this time. Yeah, and this, of course, for several kids were not understood at all, but for me it was kind of very significant, and I reacted to this. So I became politically interested because of this. And if I used a couple or 3 words to say what was my feeling. First of all, fear. Second, I would use the Greek word paralogism or irrationalism. Okay, and third, lies, all the time. Lies in the radio, everywhere, in the school. So it happened to me to hate these things. Mm-hmm. Lies, first of all, paralogism, and what was the other one? Fear. Fear is the most difficult to deal. Yes, but
but you made it through. How did you do it?
You also mentioned the difference in the culture in the environment from the villains to the capital of Greece, Athens. I would say my classmates were very, very friendly to me, unbelievable. Even today, usually if you are kind of a minority, it was perhaps I was the absolute minority, somebody from nowhere going to Athens. The first thing that one would think is bullying, fun, etc. But they were very, very friendly, and they embraced me, and the next steps were very easy for me. So I was very, very lucky, actually. Yeah, and that school was really good. Yeah.
Were you a good student?
Yeah, I was a good student. Yeah, I was a good student. I'll tell you one story. I was good in ancient Greek and in mathematics, both. I think it was in the 3rd year of the high school, and a new mathematician came in the beginning of the year, and he after 1 month of teaching, he gave us a test in order to see what happens with the class. And so after a week after, he had the results of the test and started to announce the results. Says, Karamitros, your grade is 13. Karachalias, 15. And when he reads me, Koutsoyiannis, yes, it's me, says, you will enter a Polytechnic, the Polytechnic school, and nothing about the mark. So this meant, of course, that I was good enough because Polytechnic, National Technical University of Athens, was and still is the best higher education foundation in Greece. So this also facilitated my decision where to go.
Okay, so your math teacher's prophecy materialized.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. Yeah, but those, as we have said, were turbulent times in Greece and the Technical University. We know it from history now. Played a crucial role in the political events of that era.
Yeah. So,
can you tell us what actually happened? Because you were there, perhaps an eyewitness. perhaps a participant.
Yeah, I entered the university in October 1973, and in November it was the uprisal of the students against the dictatorship. And of course I loved that, and I wouldn't lose that, so I was there. There was the occupation of the university for 3 days and nights, and I was there all the 3 nights. Yeah, and well, initially people started to gather around the university, perhaps hundreds of thousands. There were. It was the first time that people reacted so strongly and massively against the dictatorship. But then the dictatorship hardened
Its reaction.
its reaction, and they sent us tanks. So I would, well, it a posteriori it was reasonable for them reaction, but for me it was kind of strange. I was very much afraid of that, and well, anyway, I left, and I was again lucky. Many students were arrested. I was one of the lucky ones who were not arrested, not killed, because several people were killed also, not inside the university, but from the period, from the region near. Yeah.
Good. This unpleasant event eventually cleared the way so that democracy was re-established.
Yeah.
And
some months after that.
Yes. So political activism did not detract you from your studies at the Polytechnic, right?
Yeah.
Because you got a solid training in civil engineering, including hydro engineering in all its aspects. In your area of specialization, what attracted you to this field? Now we're getting a little bit more down to the nitty-gritty of things.
Indeed, political activism was very fashionable at this period, and there were several groups, almost all of them left-oriented. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had some small contribution, but I liked science as well, even more, I would say, and through the years, even more than before. Yes, and as you said, I was a good student even in the university. I can tell you some stories again. To answer your question, why I chose this particular issue, because civil engineering is very broad, mm-hmm. and when one enters the school, he thinks or she thinks that it's about building houses, bridges, etc. And me too, I didn't know that water is part of civil engineering. But for me, water was very, very attractive. So in the third year, perhaps there was a fluid mechanics course, which I would say it was kind of easy for me, because
and all because
because I knew water, the behavior of water, so and I could also expand toward the behavior of liquids and fluids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was my exam was very successful, but also I had some connection. I was kind of chair of the class, and I went to the professor to ask why there is a delay in announcing the marks. And the professor asked, George Noutsopoulos, his name, asked me why you are interested. Because the class is kind of anxious, you know. And say, what's your name? And I said, my name is this. And he said, I don't know you. I said, sorry, professor, I'm working in the morning and I cannot attend your lectures. Yes, you know what is your mark? He says, I believe I was successful. I expect a good mark. He says, it's 10. He says, oh yeah, I'm very happy. Yeah, but we have a problem. What's the problem? How could you get a 10 without attending the class? I read the and say, which book you read? He says, your book, professor. And he replied, my book is not readable.
For those who do not know, 10 is the highest mark. You can guess it, of course.
But good. This was about fluid mechanics. For hydrology and probability stochastics, I had the opposite experience, very bad experience. In probability, I'll tell you this anecdote because it's funny. I asked the professor a question when he was telling something. I don't remember exactly what my question was. His reply was this: how dare you ask the professor a question?
Good democratic attitude. Good.
And in hydrology, in the first lesson, there was a tutor, and I asked. He started writing some numbers, etc. And I asked, "Can you please tell us what's the problem and what we are going to find here?" And he says, "You are an idiot, and whatever I say, you will not understand."
Okay, well, this was quite an experience, but let's continue now. You got a general civil engineering education, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you received the know-how of an engineer, civil engineer. Did you use this in practice? Because it seems that you did not go straight into hydrological research.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. The first thing I thought after finishing the university was to find a job, and I found a job initially as in a consultancy office, but this didn't last a lot. Just 3 months. There was kind of argument with the boss, and after that I decided to make my own company, let me say, with some friends. So we made eventually 3 companies, I think. And I work as an engineer, particularly in structural engineering, for 3, 4, perhaps 5 years. Yeah, before going back to research. Yeah, so I have some experience as a structural engineer. I calculate, because at that period we didn't have computers, etc. I calculated several buildings, a lot of buildings. Second-hand works, of course, because for the young people it was not so easy to get in contact with the real investors.
Good. So there's always something good in obstacles and in difficulties.
Absolutely, yeah.
You decided to do research in hydrology. I would say, fortunately so, for you and for us. And you enrolled in the PhD program in the hydro area at the Polytechnic.
Mm-hmm.
How did you make that decision? And that's actually more interesting. Why probabilities and stochastics which at that time I would think would have been quite a novel approach in hydrology.
First of all, Antonis, you did your PhD in Germany, right?
Right.
And you had programs, PhD programs. And in Greece we have now PhD program, but at that period there was not the concept of a program was absent, I would say. So I started working on research on a PhD. Yeah, this was the result of several coincidences. For instance, first of all, I separated with the colleagues in the company, and I looking for something else, including my first wife. I separated from her as well. Then my wife, Anna, really encouraged me to do this PhD, and this was very important because usually we do what our bosses want to do. So she's a lovely boss. And I had that encouragement. And in terms of the subject, I would say the most important coincidence is that I got a book. There was a προσφορά, πώς το λέμε, sale in the bookstore of Papoulis' book. If you know the book, probability stochastic processes, probability random variables and stochastic process. And I bought this book, and I was impressed. This guy is really amazing, the way he puts things and he writes. So I read this book, I loved this book, and I decided to do stochastics. Yeah.
Good.
So this was the plan.
Well, it looks to me not much of a plan. It's a random event, but it turned out to be a good
It's
one.
my style.
So that research and the PhD degree that resulted from that was your passport to academia, right?
Mm.
What were the milestones on that road?
Mm. Well, the milestones. In terms of the PhD, I finished it in 88, and then I got a position of a lecturer in 1990. So this is an important milestone, of course. And then I started to publish I have from this period some publications. I kind of εκπόρθησα, πώς θα το λέγαμε, conquered, even got a resources research which was unbelievable for Greece. So I had these publications in the initial steps of my career, and there was no culture of publishing, particularly in such journals in Greece. So this would be counted as a milestone. And then I met people. These are again very important milestones. For instance, in 1999, I went to the Imperial College and worked together with Christian Onuf and Howard Witter. I stayed there for 4 or 5 months. Yes, and then I also met Alberto Montanari perhaps it was in EGQ conference, in an EGQ conference, and we started to work together on some issues. Initially just exchange ideas, but actually I spent a period in Bologna with him. This was in 2006. Before that, also I spent a few months with Costa Georgakakos and Aris Georgakakos in the US. Important milestones for me as well. other people I would put in my milestone sequence would be Tim Cohn, the late, very nice guy, very kind guy, and Harry Lynch from USGS. This I got in contact with these people from a review because I reviewed their paper, Naturally Trendy, a very seminal, a milestone per se. And who else? I would say also Vit Clemens was a milestone in my career, and we started arguing with him from a paper of mine this time because he thought I miscited him. So we started an exchange, and eventually he came to Greece to fight. Yeah, he was a lovely guy and a hero, I would say.
Well, you were also at that time, I think, you worked closely with Zbyszek.
Yeah, absolutely. Zbyszek, this is an interesting story. Kundzewicz, yeah. Again, this started from several failures. I had several, perhaps the two most cited papers of me were rejected, one by Journal of Hydrology and the other one by WRR. So I decided to send it to Hydrological Science Journal. So Zbyszek reacted very fast and very positively and published the papers. And of course I was happy, and we got very close, and eventually he invited me to become his deputy editor, so I stayed in hydrological as a co-editor and editor of Hydrological Sciences Journal for a period of 12 years, up to a year ago or something like that. Yeah. So Zbyszek is a very nice guy, and it's most important that with Zbyszek we have different opinions on one issue, very sensitive issue on climate, but otherwise everything else was very smooth and in full agreement, particularly about the journal, but even about climate, Zbyszek is very good scientist and very generous with the opinions contrary to his. This is very rare.
Good. We'll come back to this, but before we do that, your work has received recognition. You were the recipient, for example, of EGU's Henri Darcy medal in 2009. You also received the International Hydrology Prize, the DUG model. I think this was in 2014.
14, yeah.
Right? And you have been editor, as you said, of the Hydrological Sciences Journal for 12 years. And you have been a member of major hydrological science outlets, WRR, Journal of Hydrology, HES. Now, how would you summarize your major research approaches and contributions? I know this would take several interviews, and we don't have that much time, but could you just sketch it out in broad, in the major features, just broad paint brushes? This information could be useful, interesting for our viewers. So, in short. But okay, I'll help you a little
question.
bit. Let's of what do you, first of all, what do you think about the relationship of stochastics and physics? Let's start.
Okay,
broad.
this is yeah, this helps because I believe that it's not necessary to make the distinction between stochastics and physics, or even statistics and physics. Yeah, generally it is thought that these are two different things. And physics is something deterministic, and stochastic is something that is kind of mathematical, it's a mathematical trick or something. Well, this is it is true that mathematics and physics are not exactly the same thing, but they are very closely related, I guess. Okay, in a similar manner, physics and stochastics are again very closely related. And just to give the example, in the 18th century, the idea about heat was that it's a caloric fluid, something that flows from hot to cold. Okay, and then Boltzmann came and said it's the motion of molecules, etc. And he was able to calculate entropy, estimate entropy statistically. I mean, entropy, according to Boltzmann, is a probability of perhaps he formulated the inverse. I mean, he said that it's the probability of the different the number of the logarithm of the number of different possibilities, which is the minus logarithm of probability. So, of course, I believe everybody would agree that entropy is a physical concept. And actually it was introduced before Boltzmann by Clausius as a physical concept, which was also very useful in engineering, in order to make combustion machines and whatever machines. So, and if entropy is a physical concept, then stochastics or statistics is part of physics. That's my opinion. So it's not necessary to contrast stochastics and physics. And to mention another example, I have tried to prove important relationship in hydrology, the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, which is the equation that
vapor pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, it gives you the the saturation vapor pressure, or it gives you the equilibrium of the gaseous and liquid phase of water. So this is, of course, a physical equation, but my aim was to prove this equation by maximizing the uncertainty of a single water molecule. So if we speak about, let's say, a psi water molecule, which was to hide itself, so that if you want to hide yourself, you maximize the uncertainty in order someone not to find you. So with this idea, focusing on a single molecule, the psi molecule, and expressing the uncertainty about this bond. Is it in the liquid phase or in the gaseous phase first? Then its energy. What is the probability of the different states of energy? And by maximizing that, I found exactly the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, and I have published this proof. Of course, it's a known thing, but again, you can find it by purely probabilistic thinking.
Good. That is, of course, very small scale.
Yeah.
Can you do similar things at a larger scale in the field, which is really the thing that interests us?
Yeah, of course. This is the most difficult question, I would say. Perhaps also Guder, a couple of days ago in his lecture, in Mendel lecture, referred to the scales. I believe the situation is this. Stochastics is a very powerful way of thinking, both for simple things and for difficult and for complex things. I referred before to the case of a molecule and its motion, its energy, etc. When we speak about water, we have, of course, myriads of molecules, but they are all the same. They are all so you can have a representative of all. And if you have this representative and write the equation for this representative, there is no change among the group of all molecules, and you can prove something by deduction. If there are differences in the different elements, then you cannot do effectively deduction. So then you have to make induction. And in order to make induction, you need data. So you macroscopize, but you use a different methodology. Even in the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, you start from a small scale of the molecule scale, and you macroscopize. You find a law that is a deterministic law derived by probabilistic thinking of one scale. You have a deterministic law in the big scale, starting from the full uncertainty in the small scale. And then this thinking could work in principle also from the scale of the room to the catchment scale, but the bricks are different. So you also need measurements. Otherwise, macroscopization is again the way of doing things, but also you need probabilitation. That's my philosophy.
Good. And the new terminology, I would say. I will challenge here the situation a little bit. You're known not to shy away from controversy, right? May I then invite you to comment on a subject in which your views do not align with those of the mainstream thought? You have probably guessed what I have in mind. I'm talking about climate change. So I will be a little bit provocative. How do you feel about going against the current? Is the evidence perhaps not adequate for climate change to be accepted? And to make things a little bit more interesting, can the majority be wrong?
First of all, you reminded me one thing that I didn't have in mind actually. My diploma thesis was entitled Penetration of a Jet into a Counterflow. And it was a laboratory experiment, and I had the pipe with the outflow of a jet against the flow. So this was my diploma thesis. I
now I see what you're getting at.
thought before the relationship with climate. And you see, when even if you have the initial velocity is very high, there is always a very small length that this can penetrate. So it's important. It's much easier to go with the flow. Okay, but again, there are several coincidences that have led me to this road. Let me say. Well, it happened, a dramatic drought happened in Athens. This started, but it was 1988, 1989, just a year or two before the 90s. Yeah. And well, this eventually lasted 7 years. And well, for a hydrologist, it's a laboratory experience to work with this, and I worked very seriously with this problem, and it happened to also develop good relationship with the manager of the water supply system, and I studied with my colleagues, we studied all the details of the system. And of course, one initial thought is to see what the climate models say, or whether it is a different regime related to climate change, etc. Actually, there are several other incidences of droughts in California, in Australia, and they always connect such issue with global warming, whatever. But it happened to look for information in database at that period. Databases of hydrological information were not so widespread, but for instance, we found a nilometer record, which is 849 years, if I remember well, and we studied what this nilometer, this long series says. So I got involved with what today we call Hurst-Kolmogorov behavior, and on the other hand, well, we developed our model, we based our model on this idea of Hurst-Kolmogorov behavior. And we developed a decision support system for Athens, including for the drought period, based on that idea. And it was, the model was good. Eventually, the management of the drought was perfect, even if everybody thinks that Greeks are not good in crisis management. This is for the political crisis. For the water crisis, we are very good, actually, and we have experience from the ancient times about scarce of water. So, and then I compared what we had measured, what we had predicted with this modeling framework, with what the climate models say. And I found that they were irrelevant. I'm not going into detail, but yeah, they were irrelevant. So I started to question myself. I didn't have a bad faith initially. I thought they would tell something, these models. But I found that they said nothing. And if I stuck on these climate models, I wouldn't have a reply for the engineering problem. So then I started to publish about my skepticism on climate outputs. And there was no serious argument against my findings. Of course, there were arguments like this guy is, this research is useless, is dangerous, whatever. There is a comment of my paper saying, entitled, A Black Eye for Hydrological Sciences Journal. And the black, I was given a black eye to Hydrological Sciences Journal, whose I was an editor. And of course, I replied with the title, Does scientific dialogue give black eyes or opening closed eyes? Yeah, so slowly, I developed this skepticism through my research, which was particularly unfunded. So it goes research for curiosity.
Okay, well, that is good food for thought. And hopefully this will fuel the debate on climate change some more. Here I would like to quote Heraclitus, one of your favorite philosophers, who said, Polemos patir pandon.
Right.
Conflict is the father, the creator, the generator of everything. So we need some conflict of thought, not any other conflict. Which brings me now to the general subjects of thinking and philosophy. You're a student of life in ancient Greece, Athens, I think in particular, from its philosophy to its technology. And Heraclitus is one of your favorite thinkers, as is Aristotle. Why are they so important to you?
Well, Heraclitus is the father of dialectic thinking. And if I may add to what you said, a similar aphorism by him, which goes like, το αντίξουν συμφέρον, εκ των διαφορόντων καλεί στην αρμονία και πάντα κατέριν γίνεται. Which says, which translates like, το αντίξουν συμφέρον, the opposition unites. Mm-hmm. Opposition unites. And the best harmony springs from disagreement, and everything is generated from strife. Strife?
Yes, strife.
Oh, okay, from strife. So this is another thing that he said. And of course, he also said Pada Rei, which is the slogan of our hydrological decade. And another thing who said is, Eon pesesti peson pesevon, which means time is a child playing, throwing dice. It's exactly the opposite of what Einstein says. God does not play the dice. He says, he doesn't say about God. Perhaps he was a little more modest in terms of knowing what God does. He said, time throws dice. So, if you compare what Heraclitus said 2,500 years before Einstein, and who was correct, whom you will admire. And I have, of course, other stories about Heraclitus, but I'm not telling. You also mentioned Aristotle. Before, in the beginning, I spoke about deduction and induction, which are our methods of logic. Who discovered those? Who described those? Aristotle. But I tell you another story, because I'm not speaking for myself. I gave a lecture in Melbourne in 2011 in IUGG. Well, I'm not speaking about my lecture, but in the break after my plenary lecture, a guy came whom I didn't know. I don't remember his name, but I have my notes. I can. I have the exchange in my archive. So the guy comes in the break and he introduces himself. He was a physicist, Australian, about my age, perhaps a couple of years younger or something. And he started to discuss, because I mentioned Aristotle in my talk, and he discussed what I mentioned about Aristotle. He agreed, there was no disagreement, and he went further, indicating some other aspects of Aristotle. So I asked him, because he was very much aware about Aristotle, and, including the Greek terms. He pronounced the Greek terms in better pronunciation on mine. And I asked him...
Erasmus.
Yeah, Erasmus, yeah. I asked him, did you go to classic school? And he replied something like, unfortunately, it's only 5 years since I am able to read Greek. Was about my age. It was 2011. So it was strange for me. I said, why you learn Greek? And he replies, I decided that I could not die without being able to read Aristotle from the original. So I think this is a good reply to why I admire Aristotle. Huh?
Also, your the first fragment that you cited from Heraclitus, I think it's a good philosophy of life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we're getting close to the end, but I would like to note that you have published papers by yourself and also with others. Do you like working with others? Do you prefer working by yourself?
Yeah, of course. Well, sometimes I write indeed papers myself for problems that I have in my mind. But of course, this is not quite social and quite useful. It is much more useful to work with others, and in particularly with your students. I like working with students particularly. Before I mentioned several names of my teachers because I respect these names, but of course my students are very many, so I would not mention any name because for sure I would forget somebody. I usually have very good relationships with students, and I really love working together with students and to reply their questions and to learn from the students. Yeah, because I have learned a lot of things. They read more than I read and explain me things that I haven't read, etc. So it's I have also. We have made a group which we call Titia, from Greek for willow. This group is almost 30 years old, and it changes. The group changes because new students come and go, etc. And perhaps is the most important contribution of me that I am part of this very group of very good friends and very good scientists.
Allow me to take a step back because I wanted to get your opinion on, we talked about the ancient Greeks, but much later than ancient Greece, you have another thinker that you like, Karl Popper. What attracted you to Popper's thinking?
Well, again, it happened to buy a book accidentally, and this book was, I don't remember exactly the title, but it was about the schism in physics. So I admired that this philosopher was so aware of physics. I didn't know that before, and I understood that he was debating with Einstein. So and also two things that impressed me is that first of all he classified the several philosophies, systems of philosophy, and by the way, perhaps 7, if I remember well, of the 10 were the ancient Greek thinkers, which continued up to now. And another important thing that I recall from this book is that he attributed the notion of probability to Aristotle, because Aristotle had the idea of potentia and dynamis and energy, actuality, and he separated the two. He contrasted the two, dynamis and potentia and actuality or energy. So he said that this concept of potentia is equivalent, conceptually equivalent to probability. So his worldview is also explained in this book. He says the universe cannot be deterministic because if it were just one instant photo, let's say, would tell everything about the past and it's like Laplace's demon. But if it also were purely random, it wouldn't be the same, because macroscopically we have one picture saying everything. So it's not entirely random, not entirely deterministic. This is the determinism of Popper, which I really admire. Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to the end. So I would invite you to take a look forward. And what would you say should be the direction of hydrology in the future? What are the major challenges of today and in the foreseeable future? And what advice would you give younger hydrologists?
Okay, in terms of the future of hydrology, I'm not you did not find the right guy to make plans. Perhaps it was obvious from this conversation that I'm not good in planning. But from the recent past, I would highlight the fact that, well, after the admiration of computers and deterministic modeling through using differential equations of everything, etc., people thought that in a few years it's a matter of time and computer power to eliminate uncertainty. And in the last decade, perhaps this started to weaken. Okay, so I believe we have a big road to this direction to describe uncertainty, to understand and describe uncertainty better. And for me, the way to describe uncertainty, the formal and efficient way, is through stochastics. So I hope the connection of the big data and stochastics, including also what is called computational intelligence, would give some progress. That's my humble feeling. But about your last point, what would be my advice to students? Well, my advice is not to worry too much. life offers lots of opportunities. Even if you don't get one opportunity, there will be another opportunity. You must only have your eyes open, be relaxed, not too much stressed, because if you are stressed, you don't recognize the opportunities, and also develop your thinking and your maturity, because a mature guy is the guy who can see these opportunities, because there are opportunities and you may not see.
Thank you, Dimitri, for this interview, which I would like to close by stealing a title from your work, and to be more specific, the Henri Darcy Medal Lecture, for taking us on a random walk on water.
Thank you very, very much, Antonis.